So this is another January movie that exceeded my expectations. I'm impressed. Maybe this is a sign of how the rest of this year is going to go. Who knows? Bad Boys for Life sees the return of Will Smith and Martin Lawrence as detectives Mike Lowry and Marcus Burnett, still partners over 20 years later, though unsure of their future together. However, they both have to put their plans on hold when a series of murders begins to take place all around Miami. And when it's discovered the two have a personal connection to these crimes, they embark on their most emotional mission to date. I gotta admit, I've never been the biggest fan of the Bad Boys movies. The first one is decent, but to be perfectly honest, I find the second one to be borderline unbearable. Martin Lawrence and Will Smith are fun to watch together, but beyond that, these movies have always been for me loud, obnoxious, and sometimes even painfully unfunny, despite the fact that they have a loyal following. And when I heard a third movie was getting released, all the signs seemed to be pointing towards a disaster. Not only did this get a January release, but this is yet another franchise movie that's taking place way too many years after the last movie. Sure, there was an 8-year gap between 1 and 2, but this is taking place 17 years after 2. And on top of that, not that this would have been much of an improvement, to be honest, the director of the first 2 movies, Michael Bay, wasn't even coming back for this one. So I was expecting the worst, and it turned out I got the complete opposite. So, let's jump right in. This is my review of Bad Boys for Life. Like the previous movies, the two strongest elements here are Will Smith and Martin Lawrence. They have a very natural chemistry, and the one thing that's been consistent with all 3 movies is that you can buy these two as best friends. Their conversations feel very natural, and there's a great enthusiasm in the way they speak to one another that makes you enjoy their conversations. Will Smith in particular, I really enjoyed because it's rare you get to see him do movies like this. I always enjoy when actors get to step outside of their normal comfort zone, and that's what these movies are for him. He gets to drop the family-friendly image and let loose a little bit, and he says and he does things that we normally don't get in his movies. So getting to see that once again here is always a lot of fun. In fact, this is probably the most fun I've had with a Bad Boys movie in general. The jokes are honestly a lot funnier this time around, and the gags never really feel overplayed. Some of the material they go for is a bit obvious, like there are some jokes about the character's age, including a running gag about Will Smith dyeing his beard, but they're timed really well for the most part, and they're kept to brief exchanges so they don't wear out their welcome. And the action scenes are easily my favorite in a Bad Boys movie. Rather than going for what's known as Bayhem, where things are constantly exploding and there's destruction filling every frame, these are much better choreographed and have a little more creativity. Plus, they feel a little smaller in scale compared to the first 2 films, which is a good thing as now you're able to see what's actually going on and keep track of things. This is without a doubt a much more restrained movie than either of the first 2 Bad Boys. The direction by, and I hope I get this right, Adil El Arbi and Belil Falah is a refreshing new energy that this franchise desperately needed. It still tries to keep some of that same feel from the first 2 movies, like the color palette from them carries over, and it even makes some direct references to the events of the first 2, so it ties everything together. But there's definitely a sense of maturity here. There are times this will actually take a second to breathe and have a moment with these characters, like when Martin Lawrence and Will Smith discuss their futures as detectives and their conversation gets a little emotional. Even Joe Pantoliano as the loud, cranky captain tones it down this time around, and even he has his own moments that makes him feel a little more humane. I know these movies aren't meant to have the deepest stories, like I get the whole selling point is Martin Lawrence and Will Smith kicking ass and cracking jokes, but it is nice to see some actual character development here. There are some subplots where they attempt to flesh out some of the side characters, as well as give the villain some personal ties to these 2 characters. It gives us more of an emotional connection to everyone, and it gives this movie a lot more rewatch value, so that was great. So the ironic thing about my issues with the movie are, while it does improve upon a lot of things from the first 2 movies, the things it improves upon still aren't perfect. While the villains here are more memorable than the villains from the first 2 movies, I'd still say they're far from extremely well written. Like I said, it is a big plus that they're tied more directly to the main characters, but they're fueled by this revenge motivation, and when it actually dives into the details, it is a little underwhelming, especially since it's revealed so late in the movie. The two main villains are a mother and a son, and while the son gets a lot of screen time and is by far the more interesting of the two, the mother isn't seen for long periods of time. And when she is seen, she's mainly by herself, detached from everything else, and she's either making threats over the phone or just spewing exposition. Which is a shame because she does have a great first scene that brings up some interesting characteristics about her, but they don't get fully explored. I'd also say some of the jokes just don't work. Like, whenever they go for physical humor, those are some of the weakest points. Like, there's a scene where they're trying to get information from someone, and the person they question immediately just gets angry and starts getting violent with them, and it's meant to be played for laughs, but it comes off as a little obnoxious. There are similar jokes like that throughout the movie, and they fall a bit flat. And every so often, it will just be a little too polished the way it gets from point A to point B. There are times where a problem occurs and it gets fixed almost too easily. Like, there are a lot of moments where we'll get that typical, character being in danger, only to be saved at the last second by someone else who comes out of nowhere. Or there's a character who needs information and it just so conveniently falls into his lap and it allows him to go to exactly where he needs to go. Like I said, I know these stories aren't meant to be that deep or complex, but it happens often enough that it can get a little tiring. It's been 25 years since the first Bad Boys movie, and it's surprising how much life this series still has left in it. Will Smith and Martin Lawrence still clearly have a lot of fun with these movies, and what's nice is, this time around, it's a lot funnier, more mature, and there's a stronger sense of creativity here. Like with the other two movies, don't go in expecting a really well-written story, but if you're here for just Martin Lawrence and Will Smith in badass action scenes while making jokes, this is definitely a fun time and easily the best of the Bad Boys movies. Bad Boys for Life gets a 7.5 out of 10. Even if you're not the biggest fan of the series in general, like I was, this may win you over. It technically is a little more of the same, it just does it a lot better this time around. But hey, you can take your time getting around to this one. Bad Boys 4 is in the works, but at the rate this series goes, it'll probably be another 20 years before that movie comes out. But let me know, did you see Bad Boys for Life, or are you planning to see Bad Boys for Life? And what were your thoughts? Was it your favorite Bad Boys movie, or was it your least favorite Bad Boys movie? Do you miss having Michael Bay behind the camera, or do you like the new direction these movies are headed? Let me know in the comments below, and as always, if you like what you see, please make sure to hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll catch you next time.